Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started on today's webinar. My name is Jennifer Evans, and I'm the Prescribed Fire Extension Assistant at North Carolina State University. Today, we're very excited to have our guest speaker, Greg Seaman, talk to us about federal agency ground-based burn crews and the Prescribed Fire Training Center. And this webinar actually turned out to be perfect timing since it unintentionally landed on the same day that the government reopened. But we are very happy to have Greg and all of our federal partners back for listening in today. So this webinar is sponsored in part by the U.S. Forest Service, the Southern Fire Exchange, North Carolina State University Extension Forestry, and the Southeast Regional Partnership for Planning and Sustainability. It's been made possible through the Forestry and Natural Resource webinars. Before we begin the webinar, I'd like to go over just a few housekeeping items. And if you attended our webinar last week with John Stivers to discuss the Prescribed Burning with Consultants webinar, you might already be familiar with this process. But after the webinar, a satisfaction survey will pop up, and we ask that everyone complete the survey so that we can continue to improve our webinars. But for those of you who would like to receive continuing education credits for participating in this live webinar, or for viewing the archived webinar, you must complete all 6 of the steps shown here. So you're now on step 3, which is participating in the webinar. At the end of the webinar, you'll be given an opportunity to complete the satisfaction survey, take a quiz, and complete the continuing education form. And then once all 6 steps have been completed, that's when you'll receive your certificate in an email. So to use Collaborate, in the top right corner of your audio and video box, you'll see an audio setup wizard, and this allows you to set up your audio properly. So just make sure that your videos and microphones are turned off during the presentation. In the top of the participant section, next to the little picture of the hand, you'll see the polling box with a letter A around it. And in just a few slides, we're going to be asking the audience a couple multiple choice questions. So this is the function that you'll use to answer those questions. And then finally, I want to point out the chat box. Over on the left-hand side, feel free to use this function at any time throughout the presentation, but just be aware that the presenter and the moderators can see all of your messages, even those that are marked as private. And this is also the box that we use for questions. So if you have any questions or comments during the presentation, go ahead and type them in here, and I'll be writing the questions down as we go along, and then give Greg an opportunity to answer them at the end of his presentation. You can also use the chat box if you have any technical difficulties, and we'll try to fix those for you too. So to practice using the chat box and to let everyone know who's with us today, feel free to go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat box now, just with your name and who you're with. So I'll go ahead and enter mine in. I'd like to take this opportunity also to share just a little bit of information about the Southern Fire Exchange. It's a regional program for fire science delivery in the Southeast, and it's funded by the Joint Fire Science Program. Their mission is to increase the availability and application of fire science information for natural resource management, and to serve as a conduit for fire managers to share new research needs with the research community. I'd like to point out this webinar is actually the second webinar of a 5-part Prescribed Fire webinar series. So you can see all of our webinars listed here, and we hope that you can join us for the remaining 3 webinars too, but if not, they'll actually be archived on both the Forestry webinar portal and the Southern Fire Exchange YouTube page. So we hope that you'll come back and listen later if you can't join on the live version. And the best way to stay connected with the Southern Fire Exchange is by joining their email list or following one of their social media channels shown here. For more information, you can also visit their website, www.southernfireexchange.org. So before we get into today's webinar, we're interested in knowing who's participating in our audience, since the Southern Fire Exchange intends to reach both fire managers and scientists. So using the polling box that I showed you earlier, the box with the little letter A around it, go ahead and answer this question for us, please. Now, how would you describe your current role in regards to fire? A, fire manager or practitioner, and this would also include landowners or forestry consultants. B, fire scientist or researcher. C, student, or D, other. And I already see a lot of answers coming in, so we'll go ahead and Just give everybody a couple seconds to finish responding. Okay, so we'll go ahead and publish those results to the board now. And it looks like we have mostly fire managers and practitioners with us today, but thank you everybody for answering that question for us. And we have actually one more question for the audience. We'd like to know what kinds of training and experience you already have. So our next question is, what type of prescribed fire training do you have? A, state certified prescribed burner course only. B, federal courses such as S-130, 190, or any of the other NWCG courses. C, both state and federal courses. D, on-the-job training only. Or E, none of the above. And remember, you're using that polling box with the little letter A around it to answer those. Still a few more trickling in here. Okay, we'll go ahead and publish those responses also. And it looks like it's mostly state and federal courses, so it sounds like a lot of you already do have at least some experience. Okay, now it's time for our webinar. Today's speaker is Greg Seaman. Greg has been involved in prescribed fire and wildfire for the past 33 years, working primarily in the Southeast. Greg was a founding member of the North Florida Prescribed Fire Council and was responsible for organizing the first 3 prescribed fire media academies in North Florida. In 2005, he received the North Florida Prescribed Fire Council Chairman's Award for his work with the council promoting prescribed fire. He also serves as an instructor for a number of federal and state fire courses, including fire behavior and operations classes. Greg currently works for Tall Timbers Research Station and Land Conservancy as the fire training specialist at the Prescribed Fire Training Center. He has also previously worked for the Nature Conservancy and the National Audubon Society. Greg has a BA in zoology from Miami University and is an author for a number of scientific articles in restoration. So welcome, Greg, and I'm going to go ahead and now hand the microphone over to you.
Thank you very much, Jen. So I know I'm not going to ask a polling question, but hopefully the majority of the people on realize that the National Interagency Prescribed Fire Training Center is located in the Southeast. And we are in Tallahassee. Unfortunately, because of the lapse in funding, Mike Dewitt, the director at PFTC, was not able to join us today. But I'd like to give you a little background on how PFTC came to be, and I'm going to say PFTC because it's a lot quicker than trying to say every time Prescribed Fire Training Center. As with many great ideas, it was begun by 4 people sitting around late night after a training, and they were discussing how the Southeast was seeing increased number of detailers coming down every winter to burn on federal lands in the Southeast. And with task books recently introduced, the question was how to get federal employees more prescribed fire experience. So these 4 jotted down notes on a napkin and eventually wrote a proposal that went all the way to the Chief of the Forest Service. And in 1997, the Chief decided to give startup money for an interagency prescribed fire training center. And that center was to focus on actual field experience, and you'll see that bolded. We don't teach NWCG courses, and when you think about numerous NWCG courses, there might be some field work involved with them, but a lot of it is based on classroom experience. And we were set up to do just the opposite. A little classroom experience and a lot of time in the field. And you can see under our mission statement that it was basically to increase skills and knowledge and to build confidence in the application of prescribed fire. So today we're still an interagency staff 16 years later, I'd like to give you a little background. Mike Dewitt, who is the director, is a Fish and Wildlife Service employee. He's an RXB1, and he's also a Prescribed Fire Manager 1. And he serves as one of the ICs of one of the Southern Area Type 1 Incident Management teams. Miranda Stewart, our Fire Operations Specialist, is an RXB2, and she serves as a Division Soup on one of the Southern Area Type 1 Incident Management teams. I am an RXB2, and I serve as well as serving as a training specialist on the Southern Area Type 2 Incident Management team. And Carolyn Detweiler, who is our Forest Service employee, has been with the center since its beginning in 1998. And she's our cost unit leader for one of the Southern Area Type 1 Incident Management teams. So we try to take the prescribed fire knowledge and experience we've got and also use it in the wildfire arena. Among Mike, Miranda, and myself, we have close to 75 years in prescribed fire experience. So why do people come to PFTC? Well, looking at the last 10 years, the place to pay attention to is this last column. The average number of burns per module. So in a 21 to 20 day session, modules were averaging between 9 and 11 burns during those 20 days. When you realize that 3.5 to 4 of those days there is no burning, that's getting out and getting some fire on the ground. And that's what we were set up to do, to allow hands-on prescribed fire experience. They get the opportunity to burn in numerous community types and with a lot of different cooperators from federal, state, and local agencies, universities, NGOs, and even private landowners. So here's who's attended our sessions and our workshops. And I'll talk about workshops a little later. Since 1998, we've hosted almost 1,800 students, participants, attendees, whatever word you like to use. You'll see that all 5 federal land management agencies are listed up here. And by far, the largest number of attendees have come from the U.S. Forest Service. That's not surprising when you realize that the majority of our funding for the center comes from the U.S. Forest Service. So who are the participants? Well, 70% of them come from west of the Mississippi River. This is important to realize that we're bringing in people who have no experience or very little experience burning in the southeast or with active prescribed fire operations that continue new sites every day. 90% of our work of them work for the federal agency, work for a federal agency, and they're attending because they need to either meet some agency qualification requirement or they need to get some experience to be able to help their host, the unit they're from, put fire on the ground. So you can also guess the majority of these people work in fire suppression positions, but we're seeing an increased number of them working in fuels positions. And you'll also notice that the average participant age is 30, might be even a little higher than that, and they have at least 5 years or more of wildland fire experience. We're not attracting new fire folks, but we're attracting those with some experience who need to get that prescribed fire experience to benefit their units and to move forward in their career. So what has PFTC been doing on the ground since '98? Well, you can see we've conducted a little over 2,400 prescribed burns. We've burned in 6 states, though the majority of those burns have taken place in Florida and Georgia, with Mississippi and South Carolina probably second down that list, then Alabama. North Carolina and Tennessee probably follow that out. We have not gone to Tennessee often. You have to think about people starting from Tallahassee and then we put them in a couple of pickup trucks for a module, and they're driving everywhere. So going all the way to North Carolina and Tennessee have been more weather related than trying to reach out to cooperators. We've burned 883,000 acres, of which 30% of that has been in the wildland-urban interface, and the average burn size is about 366 acres. So we've had burns of less than an acre, and we've had burns of greater than 12,000 acres. Unfortunately, we didn't start keeping track of training assignments until 2004. So we can't give you how many training assignments, but you can see there's a good number of training assignments that have been accomplished since we started keeping track. And participants from 49 states. Can you guess which state has never had somebody show up? Well, if you guessed Rhode Island, you'd be right, but we haven't given up hope. We're still working on trying to find somebody in Rhode Island who wants some prescribed fire experience. We've also had 16 foreign countries, and we're proud of that. I know that we've actually got one of our attendees from this past year from Spain on this webinar. And though they've come from the South Pacific, from Latin America, from North America, from Europe, from Africa, I feel that Australia wins the prize. They've traveled over 9,000 miles one way to attend. So they were really interested in what we had to say and could offer them. So at the beginning of a session, we have 2.5 days of orientation. You have to remember that 70% of these attendees are coming from west of the Mississippi, and that less than 10% are coming from the southeast. So we have some classroom presentations. You can see some of those listed there. I particularly want to speak about ignition techniques, which we'll go into a little later, but safety in the southeast. Our presenter gives a talk on LCES for the southeast, and everybody should be familiar with lookouts, communications, escape routes, and safety zones. But he puts a little different twist on the LCES, and he talks about lightning, critters and canals, exotics and equipment, and smoke. And this gets people in the very early day starting to think about what they need to be focused on while they're here. Then during this, we also have 2 field trips, and that's in 2.5 days. So one's a half-day trip and one is a full-day trip. And during these trips, we specifically talk about fire planning and implementation, the fuels that they might be running into, research in ecology, and wildlife and fire. And additionally, we cover a number of other things: NEPA, planning more than you can accomplish, prescribed fire councils, history and importance of prescribed fire in the southeast, the future of prescribed fire at the state, regional, or national level. And we also give a sand table exercise, and I'll speak a little bit more to that and why we find that's important. But the fuels homework, I assign on the first day, I give them a handout on the common fuel models and community types that they might encounter using Anderson's 13 fuel models. And then within their module, their group, they have to then find the corresponding 40 fuel models from Scott and Bergen that would go along with those. And that's, for some people who are not familiar with the 40, it's a good exercise. But more important, you have to realize that these 6 people in this module don't know one another, don't know anything about each other, and it's a good way to get them to start to realize the strengths of each person in the crew. So we talk a little bit, as I said, about the history of Southern Fire. And when they read this statement by John Shea, U.S. Forest Service psychologist about burning in the southeast. This usually elicits a laugh, particularly from our western and northern participants, until they realize as we go along what's accomplished with prescribed fire in the southeast and how the southeast is really a leader in prescribed fire and why they're here. They're here to get some of that experience. We hear from many of our participants that they couldn't do this where they live. You know, fire works great in the southeast, but it would never work where they are. And so with some of that history, we show that many of the perceived western obstacles are the same in the southeast, but we've worked over, under, around, and through them, and that they can do the same. We always give acknowledgement to Herbert Stoddard for his work with pushing through the fire concerns on his work on the northern bobwhite in North Florida. I mentioned also we focus on ignition techniques. It's a big thing to work on. Most of these people who attend have had S-234 ignition operations, but they become stuck with doing things the way they've always been done where they're working. So if they ring fire, they always ring fire, no matter what they're burning or what their objectives are. If they strip head, they always strip head. And so we spend a little time on the pros and cons of firing patterns using the Oklahoma State ignitions video without the sound. We want them to focus on what they're seeing and then get them to give us what the pros and cons of all those firing patterns are, and then what devices they can use. We focus on that during our presentation, discussion during our field trips, and there's an emphasis on it in the sand table exercise. We want them to realize that it's the quality of the burn, not the quantity of the burn. And as a mentor of mine once said, you can tie a fusee to a dog's tail and make the woods black. We want them to be able to think and do what's needed. So we talk about devices, some of them that they're very familiar with, such as the drip torch, and some of them they've totally forgotten, such as matches. As I said, we're always emphasizing meeting the plan's objectives. And a short story, we burn with Avon Park bombing range, and I was with a crew that was down there to burn, and they were told they had 900 acres to burn, and they had to, they could only accept 10% scorch. They put their first three strip heads across, and the manager there said, okay, let's come back together. He said, you've met your 10%. What are you going to do with the rest of the 850 acres you got? And so they worked hard at it. It took a lot of deer in the headlight looks for a while, but they came up with a way to do it. And the idea is to get them thinking about different ways of accomplishing their goals to meet the objectives. We also have the opportunity to play with some of the power shots, and everybody hopes early on that they get a chance to go down to South Florida, get on an airboat and use a power shot. But after a couple days of doing that, they realize that for the firing boss and for the burn boss, there isn't as much to think about in planning, because you're just going down the whatever waterway you've got and shooting these balls into the sawgrass and letting them go. And then, of course, we have the Very pistols and the hand-thrown flares, chubbies, that they sort of laugh at, particularly thinking, well, it's flat, what do you need this for? Until they realize that they've also had a talk on safety and alligators, cottonmouths, and eastern diamondbacks. And so they start realizing it'd be real nice to shoot something over into that 12-foot high yopon or into that 4-foot high palmetto or just to get it across the canal, and they don't have to wade. We do have some that come that are looking for experience or requalification with a PSD machine. So with some of our federal cooperators, we do have the opportunity for them to use a helicopter and get up and actually run the burn from on high. The other thing that we really have an emphasis on is monitoring. And you can see that there's agency policies that says all federal agencies require at a minimum the monitoring they must do. And this is particularly addressed to the burn bosses and the fire effects monitors. And quite often, weather observations are taken. You get a little bit of fire behavior observations, not really much smoke observation, very little assessment of whether the treatment objectives have been met, and often no post-burn report with a map. So we're really pushing that they document on-site weather, that they're ensuring that the variables are measured and documented, that they're monitoring and documenting smoke emissions, and that's not necessarily how much carbon monoxide is being produced, but what's happening with the smoke, and document the results of the burn and evaluating whether all those things are ensuring objectives are met. And we do that through a couple of booklets that we've put together. We developed these, taking some from somebody else and kind of developing them ourselves. And we have one for the burn boss on the left, and the one on the right is for the fire effects monitor. And they're Word docs that we send home with them so they can adapt them for their home unit. But we've gotten a lot of good use out of this. And what's nice about it is when they're done, they can hand it to the cooperator they're burning for. And there's all the information that the cooperator would need to document what happened on the burn. So let's talk a little bit about what a session encompassed, looking at this last year's sessions. We had 5 20-day sessions, January, February, March, April, and June. June was the first year for us to have June. We had 98 attendees spread throughout those 5 sessions. And somebody asked earlier, what is a module? And for us, a module is 6 students with 1 field coordinator. Sometimes there might be 5, sometimes 7, but 6 seems to work real well. And in a perfect world, that module would be made up of 2 burn boss trainees, 2 firing boss trainees, and a couple of either engine boss, fire effects monitor, or type 1 firefighter, or some combination of those. That's in a perfect world. We get more burn boss applications than any other, and firing boss applications are second. So some of our we try very hard never to have more than 2 burn boss trainees on a module. It just doesn't give the opportunities for learning if we have more than that. So this past year we had 35 type 2 burn bosses, and we had 1 type 3 burn boss. Of those, 13 were recommended for certification back to their home unit. They really get the experience with our cooperators. They're there making the calls, understanding the authorization within the states, making the assignments, checking the weather, making the call, burn or not burn, filling out the go, no go, working with the firing boss to make sure ignition plans will meet objectives. And we're pushing them to step outside their comfort zone and accept those new responsibilities. We're also tweaking them a little to think about, what are your trigger points? What's your timing for reaching certain times? What kind of fuel and water use are you having? Are you meeting your objectives? What kind of wear are your personnel taking by the way the firing is going? They have to think more than just about the fire on the ground. This year we had 45 firing boss trainees, and you'll notice that they got quite a few more assignments than the burn boss. This happens for two reasons. One, some of our cooperators want the burn bosses to shadow them on the first burn to learn how they conduct a burn. But often it's because we'll use two firing bosses on one burn. This allows them to learn how to work back and forth together, and it also allows the burn boss to think about, how do I work on the firing for two different firing bosses, and how do I make sure that they're coordinating and communicating. So the firing boss has to create ignition plans and implement it, and they work with the burn boss and the FEMO to adjust patterns based on the results. We're really pushing them to step outside their comfort zone, and they often find it difficult to not join in the ignition team with a torch. But when they do that, I'll stop them in the middle of their lighting across a unit and say, so do you know where everybody else is on your firing team and what they're doing and what they're seeing? You know, what's your world right now? And their world is what's right behind them and what's right in front of them and the size 12 boots they got on. We need them to not lose sight of the bigger picture. And what we found is there's an early realization, particularly with the firing bosses, that green burns, rain isn't a season-ending event, and they can expand their ranges for relative humidity, fuel moisture, and wind, depending on the fuels and the objectives for the burn. This year we had 20 of our 45 recommended for certification. We didn't have as many engine bosses this year, but we did get 6, and 1 was recommended for certification. And the interesting thing is, looking at the cooperators we've got, they had the opportunity to work with a number of different pieces of equipment that they wouldn't necessarily find on their home unit. We had 24 FEMOs, or fire effects monitors, attend this year, and 7 were recommended for certification. And what we want them to do is to expand how they look at the results. They're usually taking weather, but we push them to take and report smoke observations, fire behavior observations, and the location where the observations are taken, so firing and the burn boss can assess how things are going. We want them to think about different ways to get fuel moisture outside of just putting the moisture sticks out the night before. We want them to also think about impacts to more than just the natural resources, but impacts to cultural resources, such as this guy who is the FEMO on this burn. He's sitting on a large cultural resource. Anybody know that that's a sawdust pile, and that was protected on the site. This year, we were really fortunate. We got 4 military vets off of a BLM crew who were working on their FFT-1, their Firefighter Type 1, and 1 was recommended for certification. But the bigger thing was to see some newer people being exposed to how prescribed fire could work, and that experience at PFTC really paid off in a huge way this summer, as they led large burnout operations on 3 wildfire complexes in Oregon and were praised for their ability to conduct successful operations while limiting damage to the resource. One stated he could not have accomplished this summer's missions without the experience he gained with PFTC. We also have worked with the University of Florida, and we're so grateful to have had that relationship develop to offer participants 3 upper division credits from the University of Florida at a cost of $210 per credit hour. Part of the requirement is for students to write a scientific paper on their experience during the session, which must include discussion of the history of prescribed fire, burn plan writing and monitoring of fire effects, as well as 2 subject areas of their choosing. And we've seen the number of participants drop in this as there's been less of a push to become Series 401 qualified within the federal system, but we still have people who are interested in getting the credits. So what did we accomplish operationally? Well, with those 5 sessions and those 98 attendees, we were able to burn a little over 70,000 acres, of which over 35% of that was in the wildland-urban interface with 172 burns. We did burn this year only in Florida, Georgia, and South Carolina, and you can see that 88% of the acreage burned occurred on federal property. Well, that makes sense because they are the largest contiguous owners of property that can be burned in the southeast. But 73% of the number of burns occurred on non-federal property. And this year we burned at 33 different sites, and we burned with the Forest Service, Fish and Wildlife Service, National Park Service, Department of Defense, Florida Forest Service, Florida Department of Environmental Protection, Georgia Forestry Commission, Northwest Florida Water Management District, University of Florida, and the Department of Energy. We also run a couple workshops, and I said I'd finally get to the workshops. Unfortunately, our 2013 workshop had to be canceled due to the federal lapse in funding. But our 2011 workshop, we had 19 participants, which represented a wealth of experience by the attendees coming in. These are mostly non-fire folks that work on sites with active prescribed fire programs or in sites that are in need of prescribed fire programs. And the objectives for this workshop are to identify the difference between fire effects between prescribed and wildfire, to expose them to resource management programs that successfully conduct burn programs with an interdisciplinary approach, and to address fire as a way to utilize it for resource benefit. We get them on a burn, and in particular that burn is to show different firing techniques to achieve objectives. Additionally, we did hold our agency administrator workshop this past year, and it's aimed at line officers like district rangers, forest supervisors, park superintendents, fish and wildlife refuge managers. And the completion serves as a training to approve prescribed burn plans for the Forest Service and to develop and maintain a fire management plan for a site for the Fish and Wildlife Service. I like the way we've run this workshop because the first day we spend getting their expectations. What do they want to get out of this workshop? And then we build much of the course content to meet those expectations. We have found a few things that we can always be prepared to work on. Building partnerships, budgeting, risk management, liability, air quality and smoke management, burning in the wildland-urban interface, how to review burn plans. They love our sand table exercise where we really put them under the gun to make decisions. And then the other big thing that they like is we give them the opportunity to lead a burn where they choose who's going to lead the burn. We get 2 burns, so we divide them into 2 crews, and they pick who's going to be the burn boss, who's going to be the firing boss, who's going to be the fire effects monitor, and then they do this with, obviously, cadre oversight. They can't just decide what they're going to do and go light it. So this coming year, we're still hopeful that we will hold our agency administrator workshop in about a month. Unfortunately, we had a little problem. We had just made our decision on who was coming. We had 33 slots and we got 50 applications. So we'd chosen our 33, sent them the information on September 30th, and we haven't heard anything from any of them since. So we're still planning on it, and we'll be starting to make get in touch with all of the people and the cadre who've been on furlough and make sure that we can still hold it. We're still planning, once again, on 5 20-day sessions. You can see the dates there. And we'll see. We're going forward with, we're going to be able to do this. We'll find out as time goes along, but that's our hope. So what do we get from the participants? Well, you can see up there 4 things listed, but I'd like to talk a little bit about the 10 take-home messages. The modules at the beginning of the sessions are tasked with coming back at the end of the session with 10 take-home messages that resonate with them from their experience and that they can take to back home and use the rest of their career. And some of those are things that they picked up from the Southeast, and some of them are things they picked up just from working with the people they're with and with the cooperators. But we originally asked them to do them as if they were bumper stickers, but I think that was starting to constrain some of the people. But a few of them have been: lack of fire is the disturbance. A weather forecast is just a forecast. We must be educators and advocates for prescribed fire in order to be successful practitioners of it. Listen to your test fire. It produces more than hot air. Flexibility is too rigid. You must be fluid. Being outside the comfort zone is a great way to learn. Topography is relative in the South. Slope doesn't have to make you breathe hard to affect fire behavior. You have to have defined objectives to burn effectively and efficiently. Fire is an ecological imperative. Strive for quality, not quantity. And this one I really like. Be clear on what you don't want to have happen. If you'd like to see some of the videos that our crews put together, you can go to that YouTube site, and we post. That's our channel, and we post the videos that are acceptable to post. And we challenge the modules that whichever module comes up with what the staff feels is the best video will get some sort of prize at our closeout dinner. And there have been some really exceptional videos put together, and there have been some that will never see the light of day ever again. We also asked them to take module photos, and all those photos are then collected. I will make CDs or DVDs for everybody on their crew of all their modules, but we get a copy of them. So many of the pictures you've seen as we've been going through are not pictures that staff have taken. They're pictures that participants have taken. And then our session quotes. And actually, I misnamed that. I should say these are participant quotes, because I'm going to give you a few from our Agency Administrator Workshop and our Resource Specialist Workshop as well. Our Agency Administrator Workshop, a few of them, absolutely one of the best courses I have taken in 22 years with the Forest Service. If you didn't learn something from this course, you were not engaged. The hands-on is what sets this training apart, a week well spent for this line officer. My expectations were far surpassed. They even addressed expectations I didn't know I had. From our Resource Specialist Workshop, I have been reminded once again how invaluable networking and exchange of ideas with other agency personnel, other disciplines, and peer groups can be. I would highly recommend this workshop for any biologist who has prescribed fire in their area. And in the sessions, the similarities of the Southeast and Ponderosa pine stands. I'll take the burning techniques I learned in longleaf wiregrass back to my home unit. I really liked that one. PFTC gave me the confidence and courage to be creative when implementing fuels reduction projects. This course has been one of the best learning experiences in my life. PFTC gave us the one-on-one attention and time that can't be spared at a home unit. And probably the one that says a lot about how we got to be. I never would have had the opportunity to experience so much in 3 years at my home unit as what I got in 3 weeks here. So if you have the opportunity, you can visit our website. You can, we've also joined the social media circus, so you please, if you've got a Facebook account, visit our site. If you just go up when you're on Facebook and type in Prescribed Fire Training Center, it should pop up, and like us. We like to be liked. But this is our motto, where every day is a burn day. And obviously, she was having a good day. But our motto sometimes is misunderstood. It doesn't mean that every day we're implementing fire on the ground, but that every day we should be doing something to be ready when the weather is right. We should be training for prescribed fire. We should be writing our plans. We should be prepping lines. We should be meeting with the other disciplines and the public to get them to understand why fire is important. We should be monitoring the results. That's where every day is a burn day. And I know I've gone a little quick, so hopefully if there are questions, I'll be able to answer them. But I just want to leave you that we have had a lasting impression on some of our participants. So I'm willing to take any questions that there may be. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you for that great presentation. So once again, if you joined us during the presentation, my name is Jennifer Evans, and I'm an Extension Assistant at North Carolina State University. And today we just saw a presentation by Greg Seaman, who works at Tall Timbers Research Station and Land Conservancy as the Fire Training Specialist at the Prescribed Fire Training Center. So at this point, I would like to take the time left in our hour to address the questions from the audience. As the host, I'll attempt to moderate these questions that have been entered in the chat box. So if you have a question or a comment, go ahead and please type into the chat box at the bottom of your screen now. And I do have a couple of questions that popped up during your presentation. I know you already answered the one about what is a module. One of our other questions that came up, it's not necessarily a question about PSCP, but it was a question more about prescribed burning itself. I'll go ahead and ask it just in case you have some insight, but somebody was speaking to a specific plot that they had a question about, and they said in 2008, a microburst destroyed 60 acres of hardwoods in extreme western Maryland. And so they did a salvage timber harvest clear cut, and they had wanted to do a prescribed burn, but instead allowed natural regeneration to come back. Is a prescribed burn still a possibility?
Well, I can say within the hardwood stuff that we've got further south, I'm not as familiar with Maryland, but I know that there's a good group as a fire learning network that covers Virginia, I think West Virginia, and Pennsylvania. So I would think Maryland would be a good group to get into. And if that person wanted to email me, I could give them a contact for that. And of course, I didn't put my email up on here. But if there's been some good work, I know, in the Appalachians with fire, particularly on hardwoods, and they've seen a lot of regrowth from that. We see the same thing down here, though our hardwoods are probably slightly different. But I would say that putting a prescribed fire into something like that could not have hurt what was happening, and could have helped actually by potentially creating a little more carbon available and nitrogen available for uptake.
Okay, great. And I'm assuming that people can just go ahead and get your email address from your website?
They can, but if people are ready, it's GSEAMON, and you can see my name up there. So gseaman at TTRS, as in Tango Tango Romeo Sierra .org.
Okay, and I just entered that into the chat box for everybody. Okay, great. So our next question was, do you teach Behave for flame length and spread rate as a planning tool?
Because we don't actually teach it, and I have some problems with Behave. I don't want to get into a philosophical discussion. Behave is based on a point source ignition, so it does tend to be a little difficult when you're using it for how are we dealing with changing what type of firing patterns we're using on the landscape. But without something better out there that I have no experience with, and I don't know what that would be at this point, most of our cooperators are using Behave. Some of them still like to go to nomograms to double check what they're getting, but Behave seems to be what's being used.
Okay, great. Our next question was, where do I go to sign up for a session?
Let me go back to the right slide. I think it's this one. Our website, if you go to that website, which was closed until today during the furlough, but if you go to that, and on it there will be a site that says training opportunities. Click on that and you'll see the different workshops and the sessions, and attached to each of those are the applications. For somebody to attend PFTC, if they're not, well, even if they are a federal, a state, a local agency, a private individual, an NGO, university student, they have to be sponsored by somebody. Even our international people who come must be sponsored by somebody. Has to say this person has the ability to participate in prescribed fires. For federal people, they have to have a red card. Not all states require a type of red card, but not all do. So we have to get something from their supervisor or whoever's saying they should be able to come. So on the application, there is a signature line for a supervisor, or if you're a student, it would have to be somebody who's sponsoring you to come. There is no tuition to come to PFTC. So you aren't paying us for anything, but you do have to come prepared to pay for your own room and board. And room and board could be staying at a bunkhouse with some cooperators, or it may be staying in hotels. We do require that people pair up so that it helps cut the costs for them and for us, because depending upon who you work for, how from the federal standpoint, how the money is taken care of. But anybody can sign up, and we've had private individuals, university students. We had a university student from North Dakota State this year in 2013. So find somebody who will sponsor you, and you can come.
Great, thank you for clarifying that. You actually, I think you saw our next question, so you've actually already answered that one. So I'm going to go ahead on to our next question, which is, what will take the place of Appendix B when it's out of publication?
Well, as far as I know, Appendix B is out of publication. You cannot order it anymore. If you've got them, don't give away your last one. So I'm not sure what is going to take the place of it. And I'm not, and to tell you the truth, I don't know why they got rid of Appendix B, because it's still very useful out on the fire line.
Okay, great. Our next question is, what type of evaluation, you had mentioned that you do evaluations after the training, so what types of evaluations have you done on your students, and are they better equipped after the 20-day class?
Well, I can say a couple things to that. From the evaluation, our field coordinators who are the people who are responsible for these students from when they get there until they leave, they do an individual evaluation on every student within their module. And so they're getting honest feedback about how they did, what they did, where they need to improve, whether they need more experience, whatever that is. We collect copies of all that. I have attempted to get feedback from previous attendees. About 4 years ago, I sent out to everybody who'd attended up to that point, and I got, I think, 5 responses. So we've not had a lot of luck in follow-up. I've had better luck with some of our workshop follow-up than I've had with attendees. But that's not to say, I did see the name of somebody on here who had attended one before, and they did give me some good feedback. So we would love to contact them, but we just haven't gotten the best information back.
Okay, and I had, we have one more question that just popped up here. Do you have contact information for your past participants, or if we contact you, could you connect us with those past attendees?
Well, it will depend upon who you want, because many of the people, we got a lot of returned information because they have either left the agency they're working for to go to a different one, so we no longer have their address, or we no longer have their email. So if there's somebody in particular they're looking for, or from a particular session or particular year, we might be able to put them in charge, but there's no guarantee. Okay, great. And I think that's actually going to wrap up our session today. We're almost out of time. So Greg, I'd like to thank you for your presentation and for answering everyone's questions. If anyone has follow-up questions, you can go ahead and email Greg directly. His email was provided earlier in the chat box. And I'm going to go to our final slides here. I just wanted to remind everybody that if you'd like to hear about our future webinars and programming from the Southern Fire Exchange, you can join their email list or follow them on Twitter, Facebook, or LinkedIn. Today's webinar was recorded and will be archived for later viewing on the Southern Fire Exchange YouTube page, and will also be available in the Forestry webinar portal. And if you'd like to be automatically informed of other upcoming webinars, you can join the email subscription list at forestrywebinars.net and then click on subscribe. So just remember, everybody, thank you for coming today, but remember to stick around for just a moment to complete our satisfaction survey, and we ask that everyone complete the survey regardless if you need continuing education credits or not. For those of you who do need continuing education credits, you have to complete the satisfaction survey, take the quiz, and then complete the request form at the end and certify that you participate in the webinar in its entirety. So thank you again, Greg, and to everyone who joined us today. Please stay on for the link that I'm about to send out. And I'll also go ahead and post it into the chat box. Since we have almost 50 people still in the webinar, it might be a little bit slow to load. So I'm going to go ahead and post that link into the chat box now. Or you can wait just 1 second, and I'll go ahead and also push it out to the portal itself.
Okay, great. It should show up here just a second. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Jen.